Chapter 23. The Ebb-tide runs. The coracle, as I had ample reason to know before I was done with her, was a very safe boat for a person of my height and weight, both buoyant and clever in a seaway. But she was the most cross-grained, lopsided craft to manage. We've all been there. Do as you please, she always made more leeway than anything else. We've all been there. Too much leeway. And turning round and round was the manoeuvre she was best at. Well, it is a little circle, isn't it? He's basically floating in a little, as we said before, a sort of half an egg that he's just floating round him. Even Ben Gunn himself has admitted that she was queer to handle till you knew her way. And he would know. Certainly I did not know her way. She turned in every direction but the one I was bound to go. The most part of the time we were broadside on, and I'm very sure I never should have made the ship at all but for the tide. So he's basically in. If you've ever been to Alton Towers, you know the rapids ride at Alton Towers where you're in that like half an egg cup thing, and you've got like a little sort of steering, like a little sort of bike handlebars that can make you can't control which direction forward or back, but you can spin like that. That's what Jim's in now. But mercifully, the tide is pushing him towards the Hispaniola. By good fortune, paddle as I pleased, the tide was still sweeping me down, and there lay the Hispaniola right in the fairway, hardly to be missed. First, she loomed before me like a blot of something yet blacker than darkness. Then her spars and hull began to take shape, and the next moment, as it seemed, for the further I went, the brisker grew the current of the ebb. I was alongside of a hawser, and had laid hold. The hawser was as taut as a bowstring. Hawser! The hawser is the big rope attached to the anchor, as far as I know. So the anchor, of course. If we're not familiar with our, I should think we're probably more familiar with our 18th century ship's anchors than we are with the modern ones, I guess, because they're the ones in cartoons. But obviously there's a big giant anchor made out of iron, and then a big thick rope holding onto the anchor to make the ship stop in place. The hawser was taut as a bowstring, and the current so strong she pulled upon her anchor. All round the hull in the blackness, the rippling current bubbled and chattered like a little mountain stream. One cut with me sea gully, his knife, and the Hispaniola would go humming down the tide. So far, so good. But it next occurred to my recollection that a taut hawser suddenly cut is a thing as dangerous as a kicking horse. Yeah, very true. You've got a very, very taut, thick rope, then you just go boing, like that. It's going to flip up like that. Deadly. 10 to 1, if I was so foolhardy as to cut the Hispaniola from her anchor, I and the coracle would be knocked clean out of the water. This brought me to a full stop, and if fortune had not again particularly favoured me, I should have had to abandon my design. But the light airs which had begun blowing from the south east and south had hauled round after nightfall into the southwest. Well, I hope you all know your compasses. Just to recap, the light airs, which had begun blowing from the southeast and the south, had hauled round after nightfall into the southwest. Phew! Just while I was meditating, a puff came, caught the Hispaniola, and forced her up into the current, and to my great joy I felt the hawser slacken in my grasp, and the hand by which I held it dip for a second under water. So a bit of slack happening. With that, I made my mind up, took out my gully, opened it with my teeth, and cut one strand after another. Doing, doing, like in a cartoon, just the rope going. Hang on, let me get my fist in. He's sawing it. Sawing like that, and it's going, doing, 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 cutting all the threads until he finally, he's aiming for doing, 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 doing. cut one strand after another till the vessel swung only by two. So I'm like, thin thread. Then I lay quiet, waiting to sever these last when the strain should be once more lightened by a breath of wind. All this time, I had heard the sound of loud voices from the cabin, but to say truth, my mind had been so entirely taken up with other thoughts that I'd scarcely given ear. Now, however, when I had nothing else to do, I began to pay more heed. One I recognised for the coxswain's Israel hands that had been Flint's gunner in former days. The other was, of course, my friend of the red nightcap, Psycho Willy Winky, the most deadly and hilariously dressed pirate on the Spanish Main. Both men were plainly the worse of drink. Super Saturday. And they were still drinking. Must still be Super Saturday in Treasure Island. For even while I was listening, one of them, with a drunken cry, "What are you fucking?" opened the stern window and threw out something, which I divined to be an empty bottle. "Fucking finish that one," into the sea. But they were not only tipsy, it was plain that they were furiously angry. Oaths flew like hailstones, swear words. "Yeah, fucking God." And every now and then there came forth such an explosion as I thought was sure to end in blows. So, explosion of shouting and arguing, I expect. It's not like grenades are going off. But each time the quarrel passed off, and the voices grumbled lower for a while until the next crisis came, and in its turn passed away without result. So it's the two pirates left on board, Israel Hands and Psycho Willy Winky, are pissed up and angry with each other, having like a you don't fucking know what you're talking about. You fucking leave me out. You fuck, just going at it like you're on. You're like, we have it. With the pub on our road, you're in bed at like 1 o'clock in the morning. The last ones are tumbling out. They've been fighting when they're in there, and they're fighting on the way out. Yeah, fuck, and just noise. You're like just dozing off. Oh, yeah, fuck it. Oh, fuck. Just rebound and just noise. No discernible words. You fucking shit. You know what I mean. You know what we mean. On the shore, I could see the glow of the great campfire burning warmly through the shoreside trees. Someone was singing a dull, old, droning sailor's song, and with a droop and a quaver, at the end of every verse, and seemingly no end to it at all, but the patience of the singer. I had heard it on the voyage more than once, and remembered these words. And then there's some lyrics here, in italics. But one man of her crew alive, what put to sea with 75? So, I'll try and put that to music now. So it's got a droop and a quaver at the end. But one man of her crew alive, what put to sea with 75? Droop and a quaver. And I thought it was a ditty rather too dolefully appropriate for a company that had met such cruel losses in the morning. So the pirates, the pirates are sad about the other pirates getting musketed in the head by the goodies. But indeed, from what I saw, all these buccaneers were as callous as the sea they sailed on. Oh, sorry, Jim. Sorry. I was too on the side of the pirates then. Sorry, Jim. Sorry. At last, the breeze came. The schooner sidled and drew nearer in the dark. I felt the hawser slacken once more, and with a good, tough effort, cut the last fibres through. The breeze had but little action on the coracle, and I was almost instantly swept against the bows of the Hispaniola. Boom. At the same time, the schooner began to turn upon her heel, spinning slowly, end for end across the current. I wrought like a fiend, for I expected every moment to be swamped, and since I found I could not push the coracle directly off, I now shoved straight astern. A lot of shipping, a lot of sailing vocab there. Will I clarify any of it? No, it'd take too long, and I don't know what they all mean. At length, I was cleared of my dangerous neighbour, and just as I gave the last impulsion, my hands came across a light cord that was trailing overboard across the stern bulwarks. So a rope dangling down to the ship. Instantly, I grasped it. Why I should have done so, I can hardly say. It was at first mere instinct, but once I had it in my hands and found it fast, curiosity began to get the upper hand, and I determined I should have one look through the cabin window. I pulled in hand over hand on the cord, and, when I judged myself near enough, rose at infinite risk to about half my height, and thus commanded the roof and a slice of the interior of the cabin. Oh, thanks, autofocus. Back we go. By this time, the schooner and her little consort were gliding pretty swiftly through the water. Indeed, we'd already fetched up level with the campfire. The ship was talking, as sailors say, loudly. So the ship's kind of going, because it's not really meant to be wobbling around on the waves like it is. And it's all made of wood. It's all made of wood. Treading the innumerable ripples with an incessant weltering splash. And until I got my eye above the windowsill, I could not comprehend why the watchmen had taken no alarm. One glance, however, was sufficient, and it was only one glance that I durst take from that unsteady skiff. It showed me Hans and his companion, Psycho Willy Winky, locked together in a deadly wrestle. You fucker! Each with a hand upon the other's throat, like Bart and Homer. His eyes Psycho Willy Winky's eyes like that, popping out. I dropped upon the thwart again, none too soon, for I was near overboard. I could see nothing for the moment but these two furious, encrimsoned faces. Fantastic word. A lot of encrimsoned faces coming out of Super Saturday pubs this weekend, I should have thought. Swaying together under the smoky lamp, and I shut my eyes to let them grow once more familiar with the darkness. The endless ballad had come to an end at last, and the whole diminished company about the campfire had broken into the chorus I had heard so often. 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest. Yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. So the pirates are getting a bit more like, you singers, give us one we know. Karaoke for the pirates on the shore. I was just thinking how busy Drink and the devil were at that very moment. Oh, Jim. In the cabin of the Hispaniola, when I was surprised by a sudden lurch of the coracle. At the same moment, she yawed sharply, and seemed to change her course. Rubber Dinghy Rapids going off again. The speed in the meantime had strangely increased. I opened my eyes at once. All round me were little ripples, combing over with a sharp, bristling sound, and slightly phosphorescent. The Hispaniola herself, a few yards in whose wake I was still being whirled along. It's a big sort of, what do you call it? Slipstream? A slipstream, if you like, from the ship. In the water, the current in the water. Seemed to stagger in her course, and I saw her spars toss a little against the blackness of the night. Nay, as I looked longer, I made sure she also was wheeling to the southward. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart jumped against my ribs. Thanks very much, Rowdy Polly. Doing, doing, doing. Just some highlights for you there. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart jumped against my ribs. There's another one for you, Rowdy Polly. There, right behind me, was the glow of the campfire. The current had turned at right angles, sweeping round along with it the tall schooner and the little dancing coracle. Bloom, bloom, ever quickening, ever bubbling higher, ever muttering louder. It went spinning through the narrows for the open sea. Suddenly the schooner in front of me gave a violent yaw, turning perhaps all the way around like that through 20 degrees, and almost at the same moment one shout followed another from on board. And at the same moment I could hear feet pounding on the companion ladder, and I knew that the two drunkards had at last been interrupted in their quarrel and awakened to a sense of their disaster. "Oh, fucking ship's moving." I lay down flat in the bottom of that wretched skiff, and devoutly recommended my spirit to its maker. In nomine Padre, Filii, Spiritus Sancti. At the end of the straits, I made sure we must fall into some bar of raging breakers, where all my troubles would be ended speedily. Oh, in nomine Padre, Filii, Spiritus Sancti. And though I could perhaps bear to die, I could not bear to look upon my fate as it approached. So I must have lain for hours, continually beaten to and fro upon the billows, now and again wetted with flying sprays, and never ceasing to expect death at the next plunge. Rubber dinghy rapids. Gradually, weariness grew upon me, and numbness, an occasional stupor fell upon my mind, even in the midst of my terrors, until sleep at last supervened, and in my sea-tossed coracle I lay and dreamed of home and the old Admiral Benbow. End of chapter.